Jenny, congratulations on your book. I hear it's been an Amazon bestseller for 160 weeks.
I know, it's strange, it's amazing, it's wild, it's wonderful. I'm very lucky, very privileged.
I'll say. And what is a God story?
Well, I define a God story as a moment where a person receives personal proof that there's more. God, the creator, a divine power, an energy source, whatever you want to call it, it's that moment where something happened to you, that aha moment, and you went, oh, it's true.
And can you give us an example?
I could give you a lot of examples. So I have 138 stories in this book of other people's stories. One that always sticks with me that was amazing was this woman describes how she took a train to go to school, and often with her train fare she'd spend it on candy and jump the train so she didn't have to buy a ticket. And she describes one day she was in a carriage all by herself. She started to get ready. She saw a ticket taker coming, started to get ready to jump the train, got in the open doorway, and as she got ready to jump, she heard a voice, an audible voice, say, "Don't jump." And she turned around. There was no one in the carriage with her, and that next second the express train went shh in front of her face. And she said, I had never been a believer, I didn't go to church, and she said, even today I still question, but I can never deny what happened to me at that moment in time.
And it saved her life.
It saved her life.
That's a real God story. And I think I'm understanding more. And what is the one thing that happened while you were publicizing the book that stayed with you?
Well, that's a really good question. I was doing a radio show in Salt Lake City, and there were 3 radio hosts, and it was a morning show, and everyone was bantering and kind of joking. Sometimes they'd ask me a question that was kind of a joke, and then they'd ask me a real question, and I was trying to go with it, and I was telling God stories from the book. And when I finished with the interview, I got on the email and I sent one of the hosts an email saying, thank you very much for having me on your show. And then I added, I said, you know, you've got some great listeners there because my Amazon ranking went up immediately after your show. And I got an email back, and the email said, we do have some great listeners. One of our listeners called right after you got off and said that he was going to kill himself that morning, that time, and he heard the God stories, he heard what you said, and he decided against it. And to me, you know, that was one of my great moments. It happened again and again where people wrote to me and said similar things, and I feel really honored. I feel really privileged, and I feel very lucky.
Yeah, because you're making a difference worldwide. And how did you get the idea for this book?
Another good question. Well, I live in Australia and I live in Maine, and I was doing one of my travels back from Australia to Maine, and I was stopping in San Diego for a few days. And my sister said, I was stopping to visit one of my closest friends. And my sister said, you know, why don't you look up one of my friends while you're there? My friend Millie, who's a minister. You should have lunch with her. And I went, no, I don't think so. But as luck or divine intervention would have it, I caught one of those horrific flus from Sydney to Los Angeles, and I ended up having to stay in San Diego to recuperate from this flu. And out of sheer boredom, I called my sister's friend. And over lunch, she asked me if I had any God stories, and I asked her what she meant. She told me it was that moment, and I told her I had 3. I told her the stories, and then she said, well, those are powerful stories. Can you write them down for me? And I thought, okay, now I've got an assignment. But you know, 6 months passed, and I found myself back in Australia, and I remembered I had not written those stories down. She wanted to tell her congregation. And so I sat down and I wrote the stories, and the moment I wrote those stories down, this huge light bulb went off. And being a journalist, I thought, wait a minute, if I have these stories, who else has these stories? And so this began the process of me asking everyone I knew if they had a God story. And more often than not, people did. And most of the time, they had a story that they had never told anyone before. And that's how this book came about.
That's brilliant. And what was your God story, Jenny?
Well, I had 3, but one that seems to resonate with people was when I was 12 years old. And I got a 10-speed bicycle, and it was my 12th birthday. And my mother said, okay, you can ride down this road and you can ride down this road, but don't ride that road. And of course, the next thing I know, I was riding down that road. And all of a sudden, I looked down from above. Now I'm 12, I haven't heard of Shirley MacLaine or anybody else, and I looked down from above, and all of a sudden I was experiencing a feeling that I can only call perpetual euphoria. It was absolutely fantastic. And I looked down from maybe 20 feet, and I saw a car, a Volkswagen with a shattered windshield, a wig of hair in the windshield, and then I looked down, and there was a body in front of the car. I watched as people got out of their cars, rushed to this body. The whole time, I'm feeling wonderful. And then in a split second, I realized that that body was mine, and I was up and running. And you know, that happened when I was 12. And from that moment, I've never feared death. I can't tell you where I was heading or where I was going to go, but that was an epiphany for me.
It's very powerful. And that was one of 3 God stories that you had.
They're in the book.
I'm going to read the book. Again. What's your next book, and when do we get to read it?
Thank you very much. The next book is called The Divinity of Dogs, and it comes out in 2012. And it's a book where people describe the moment they learn something profound about life from a moment with a dog or an experience with a dog. And I'll tell you, I cried for a whole year writing this book. It's fantastic. And it's very much under the similar vein of God stories. It's where it's short stories, other people's stories. And it's also a memoir. So it includes stories throughout my life. I loved working on it.
I can see it's an enchanting life. I look forward to reading it. Jenny, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much.